Greetings, Dr. Joseph Martin. Jihadis, boys to men, or boys to murderers, the increasing threat of world violence. Now, first off, I'd like to say that this being 9/11 anniversary, 13 years since 9/11, the one goal and aim for me to present this to you is to gain knowledge and understanding of what this process is about, and then to prevent this through education worldwide in our public schools and in our high schools, colleges and universities, and definitely in our media. And then to rehabilitate those people who are moving into the dangerous psychopathic zone of becoming jihadis. And also, I want to say that although we may be focused on groups like Hezbollah and the Taliban and Al Qaeda, and now more recently the ISIS movement, politically, religiously, I am not pointing my finger at anyone nor judging. This is a psychological, social, scientific study at the Muslim people or Islam itself, because I will be showing you that this idea, this ideology of jihad or holy war, has been present in the Jewish tradition, the Christian tradition, and of course in the Muslim tradition, and many other traditions, including indigenous peoples worldwide. I want to broaden the scope then of our insight into this, the nature and the cause of jihad and jihadism and jihadis, meaning young boys, and why they would turn into murderers in another culture and religion and another part of the world, rather than growing into mature, moral, ethical, creative, open-hearted, and intelligent men. Let's start with cosmology. We need to understand human nature and cosmology from the highest point of view. Now, in all the world's cosmologies, as you will note in creation mythology, as Joseph Campbell and others like myself have presented, there is a notion that there's a good creator and there's an evil creator. Or the good creator, as in Zoroastrianism, created another sub-god, if you like, one who's good and one who's evil, and they fight it out in war between them. And that is the nature of cosmologies in every culture known to humanity. It's in all our stories as well, even our modern culture, like Star Wars and so on, the dark evil emperor and the good emperor, and so on and on. Now, in philosophy, let's look at it from a metaphysical point of view. In the theory of knowledge and the theory of reality, which is ontology, and epistemology, how you can know knowledge or the truth, there's always different belief systems as to whether there's a unitive way of knowing the truth or a sectarian or a divisive way of knowing the truth. And in this realm of knowledge or ideology, we have something called belief systems. And belief systems are sort of on the way to becoming the higher knowing or identity of the individual and the culture and the universe. It's been said that all wars have been fought and bled people to death, murdered civilians, just on the basis of opposing belief systems. And that's exactly the truth. And I will get to the point when I get to psychology about the good and evil sides of human nature. But let's just look at history. Now, we have all these opposing kinds of groups of men or brothers, in essence. We have Cain and Abel, we have Jacob and Esau, and Isaac and Ishmael, and there we have the division of the Jews and the Muslims right there. But we have this in all the cultures of the world. For in fact, we have Moses and Aaron in the desert, and on and on and on. I could just simply rhyme off all the different opposing sets of brothers and their own conflicting ideologies that oppose one another. I want to state this to show that this is an historical, cross-cultural aspect of human nature. And then we have the other notion from Freud, which is the death wish, in particular, the patricide, the wish to kill the father. So we have this, and I'll just point out again just a few examples. Alexander the Great with his father and the need to conquer the world and show his father up and do one better. And we have Hannibal, and we have many of the ancient Roman emperors, way too numerous to mention, who were destructive, killing murderers. And then we have Napoleon, Hitler, Stalin, Mao, and many others, and some present on the planet today. So what we're looking at here is something that we need to focus on that has to do with the fact is why at this time in the early 20th century, 21st century, why are so many disaffected people, young boys, and we're talking about boys in their teens and their 20s and some maybe in their 30s, from within the Arab world and from America and Canada and Britain and Australia and different countries and cultures, all moving towards an interest in jihadism and a culture and a religion and a territory that has nothing to do with their upbringing, their homeland, or how they were raised. Again, I want to point out, and this is based on a number of books that I've recently written on masculinity and identity, and also another one on boys and the millennial generation, to show that we are in dire straits right now in terms of the boys of the world and what's missing in their psyche. Now, I'd like to suggest also that there's a, before I get to that, I'm just kind of broaching larger topics here. There is, again, according to psychology, there's the love wish and the need to be compatible and have friends and connected and communicating. And then there's the death wish, which Freud said is in part our aggression. And within this aggression, we have a notion that there's somehow inherent in the collective psyche from time immemorial within our tradition, going back to Neanderthals and way before that, it's in the Homo sapiens kind of psyche, if you like, to have a bloodlust, a need to murder, and in fact, an enticement and an enjoyment of killing people. And we're seeing that in the jihadis today, whether it's terrorizing women and children, elders, or mass murdering whole groups of soldiers in Iraq, or beheading foreign journalists who are thought of as the demon or the devil, and so on. But I'll get to that in more specific terms later. But there seems to be this cyclical, rhythmic timeline of the need for war to satiate the bloodlust of the people, the collective. And this is greatly unconscious because we're just coming out of the dark ages now, and humanity as a species has so much to learn and to grow and to become conscious of ourselves and why we do what we do, and our inordinate need, apparently, to destroy everything that we've created, as we did in the First World War, not only just killing millions of people and civilians on either side of this, again, just to do with belief systems, but also destroying all our great civilization, its culture, its institutions, its buildings, and everything that went with it. The Second World War, and on and on. The Korean War, the Vietnam War, the Iraq War, war in Rwanda, war in Serbia, and on and on and on, and now in Ukraine, and now also again in Palestine and Israel, and of course in Iraq and Syria. So there is a cyclical need for war to satiate bloodlust. And we have yet to come to terms psychologically as individuals or as nation states or as a human species with this. And of course, what are the stakes? The stakes are high now that we have the technology of nuclear warhead and atomic bombs. So the threat is dire and great, and it's said that the jihadis' ideological, political, social movement on the planet is perhaps the greatest threat to all of society and all of the world itself. Because it's ideological, it's really hard to eradicate. It won't do to kill people or destroy them with aerial bombs because the ideology now is in all the boys and women, in fact, young women as well. But I'm just focusing on boys and their psychology now worldwide in the Arab world, in the Jewish world, in the Christian world, so called Western, Eastern, tribal, wherever. Part of this is as we've got more population now, the old ways of going to war with your neighbors and killing, where the men had come status and prestige as warriors who could go to preserve the women and the children in the village and come back with spoils, but also having killed all their neighbors. This isn't possible anymore. In a highly communicative, telecommunicated, geopolitical melange that we live in with so many people, it's not possible to be a warrior and go out to kill, except in the way that is either the positive military, which I put out as an archetype, and it may be one of the only ways or the only options for young people these days, or what I call the shadow military, which would be jihadists who are based on killing and destroying and murdering and beheading and terrorizing and creating genocide wherever they can find it. So, what is this based on in terms of psychology then? Well, let's look at Carl Jung. One of his many greatest ideas that he's brought to the world now is the notion of the shadow. The shadow is everything we cannot accept about ourselves. It's our evil side or desire to kill, be aggressive, to murder. It's everything that society will not let us accept. We have a very thin veneer of civilization, which is very paper thin, easily just burnt up and destroyed. The social propriety of laws and repercussions, in terms of the justice system, is not strong enough to override all the hidden shadow within. And so, I'm going into some of the preventative issues here, or ways, or means, is for individuals to consciously look at their own shadow and potential for evil and transmute that into something positive, selfless, caring, compassionate, connective, and emotionally open, rather than burying it. And then what happens is what's called shadow projection. Now, you may want to watch the 2 videos I did just a few weeks ago on the shadow, and that will give you some background as to what I'm speaking about. Because the psychology of all of this with young boys is really where the preventativeness will be and the rehabilitation, and stopping those people from committing further crimes by having a social collective consciousness raising about these issues. Now, one of the reasons why the jihad's been going on for so long, and maybe we haven't really noticed it, is because the liberal-minded Western people have a denial of the intensity of what this terror could be as a threat for the world. This denial is a very common psychological denial. It's a denial of all the fears we have about things beyond our awareness or beyond our borders as a country. And it's the denial of death itself, which is a huge issue. And you'll like to look at the videos I have on the denial of death as the cause for war and murder. And also the denial of ideologies and belief systems that are different from ours, because we can still be in a situation where we're denying everything as well, and we're not aware or even interested in bridging the gap and understanding the other side, which is what this video is about, to bring together some kind of a common understanding and cohabitation. So let's just move on with that a little bit. With boys these days, they're living in a society that they're the children of the boomer generation, at least in the West, and now, of course, in the East as well. In China, we have a very capitalist, kind of materialist society. Many of them are X generation, but the children or the grandchildren of these post-World War II families and societies and cultures that were given everything. They had the work, they had the money, they had the ability to buy homes and cars and toys and cottages and excessive things that were totally unnecessary, and indulged themselves in the pleasure principle and became very narcissistic, as most boomers are. Some of them are rehabilitating themselves, and that's good to see. And the X generation is kind of in the middle with all of this pleasure, narcissism, and ego. But the young people, the millennials, those under the age of 30 or 35, these are the ones that we're really concerned about because they look to their parents and their grandparents who seemingly have had everything. And these young people also have never been in war, so they don't understand what it's like, except with all the barrage of violence and murder and warfare on their video games and the media, in the movies. The criminal activities they see that are rampant in the corporations, in the political system, in the municipal system, where municipal systems now are known to be run by criminal organizations and those who provide services to the cities, and also on provincial levels and national levels and international levels. The levels of crime with the mafia, different ethnic mafias from around the world. There's about 10 different ethnic mafias, and the drug trade, alcohol trade, sex and prostitution trade of women, and so on. And all these things are issues that the young people see and maybe know about, and they're enticed by it because all we see in the media, seemingly 95% of the media and the news and the movies and the popular culture and entertainment, including the songs, the popular songs other than Bob Marley, are all based on violence, murder, conflict, revenge, and there's hardly ever a good guy, and often the good guy doesn't win. This, these popular cultural entertaining storylines, if you like, are embedded and brainwashed into the young boys' minds from the ages of 2 and 3 and 4 years of age all the way up. There's no parental guidance on the internet necessarily or in the movies they watch. The levels of violence worldwide in high schools and among boys and peers is growing, as it is among the young women who have a lot of violence among themselves. And there's no moral compass in the families or the societies of our times. There's no moral compass. Often children are unwanted. They come from broken homes or separated, divorced homes, and where there's no sense of being loved, being needed, being wanted. If we tie this in with archetypal psychology, we'll see that what are these roles that these young people fall into? And the roles would be the rebel, which is a necessary, essential stage in the teenage years that one typically would go through, but not in the case of the jihadis. And also the black sheep, the wrong one, the bad one. And if one falls into that, or one falls into being the bully archetype, which is so explosive and all pervasive worldwide, in fact, we see that these bullies want to expand to yet another stage because there's a number of things that drive this. Their hidden unconscious need for aggression and bloodlust, their hidden unconscious sense of meaningless and purposelessness. Add that with the boredom and the ennui, and also perhaps the drug taking of drugs that can fracture the mind and bring all sorts of untoward things forward in the psyche, and the criminality and the violence, and seeing the criminals and violence people get away with it, and there's no justice for it, either in real terms or even in monetary terms. These young people, the young boys of the world, are seeing that there's a sense of enticement. There's an adventure here. There's a sense of, well, I can become one of these. From all those different factors we've just looked at, they feel friendless and they feel alone and they feel emotionally disconnected from, say, their mother. And that's the most important focus we're going to focus on when we get to the prevention of this. Unloved and unwanted by their mother, unconnected emotionally from their father and their brothers and sisters and their peers, And the fact that they're gullible because they have no sense of core identity or inner strength or courage, that they can be brainwashed by these cults, whether Islamic or Christian or other cults. And there's many kind of cults. As an anthropologist, I've studied the history of cults for the last 1,000 years in all the societies of the world. And people, because we're in an unconscious dark age, are prone to being brainwashed because they don't know who they are and they have no inner sense of moral compass or meaningfulness in their lives. So, as this happens, people here all over the world, in Canada and America, they watch the videos, they watch the news, they go to a local kind of a place where people are actually actively trying to engage them to go over to, say, in this case, the Middle East, to partake in, say, ISIS or Al Qaeda, as we found out. This has been going on for at least a decade or so, and probably much more prevalent than we yet know. So, this commentary here, this psychohistory of the whole thing, I want to point out that this has not only been going on for thousands of years in all cultures, but for all kinds of geopolitical and historical and psychological reasons, this is seemingly coming to a head. We have more massive wars more often, and they're involving the whole world. And simply going to war and using bombs and troops on the ground, feet on the ground, so to speak, will never, never cure this. This is all ideological. It has to do with belief systems and the psyche of human nature as individuals and as collectives. The archetype of the warrior, or Mars, if you like, is one that's inherent in all of us. And many of my videos, as you've been watching them, is how to transform the murdering warrior, who's revengeful, into the spiritual peacemaker warrior. Lots of videos on that and lots of examples of spiritual peacemakers, including Daganawida, Jesus, Buddha, Lao Tzu, Guru Nanak, and Muhammad himself, although he was raised in a warring time, and one of his impulses was to bring together the warring factions of the different tribes where he was living at the time. However, we know from the history of Islam that the warring factions between the Sunni and the Shia are still inherently there after centuries of infighting, and it's not only them but many other smaller sects of Islam that are warring together. For instance, right now, in the jihad, those people within the political dominating sphere of the very simplistic view of the Quran and Muhammad's words, peace be upon him, are all out to do in Saudi Arabia because that they feel that it's too tied to the Western education and democracy, and of course oil and so on. Even though Mecca and Medina are the two great centers of Islam, there's an attempt to bring down the Saudi regime. There's so much to say about this, one hardly knows where to go next. However, I'd like to suggest that we need to focus then on the psychology of all this. The shadow side of these young men is coming to the fore. They're enticed into their dark side, their shadow side, just as Anakin Skywalker was, and they become dark, evil murderers and emperors, as Anakin was, who actually went on to become Darth Vader. This is a deep, trenchant archetype in the human psyche, and collective and cross-cultural. I would say it's probably one of the most prominent archetypes of our time. The dark warrior who wants to murder and kill because he's lost his love, or he was dropped by his girlfriend, or the one he loved, and he felt revenge and anger and rage and buried grief coming up, and then just the wanting to destroy everything around in order to find some sense of meaning or purpose. That's at the base of the jihadi personality or psychology. These people are irrational. They lack courage, although in a mob mentality they can be very strong. They're psychotic in the sense that they're all psychopaths. There's no emotion, no shame, no guilt, no remorse. They love engaging in the most heinous of terrorist acts of killing groups of men and other boys as well, raping the women, killing the children, and very kind of repressive and regressive. So the psychological state of these individuals is so puerile and so childish, so repressed and so regressed that there is no attempt at emotional or psychological maturation. And therein lies the preventative nature of what we need to be looking at. At the core of all this, of course, is the lack of emotional connection to mother, to father, brothers and sisters, and the lack of friends, deep friends. The depression, the loneliness in young boys and men around the world, the suicidal tendencies of these young, the need for fraternity and brotherhood is missing because they've been bullied by so many people. And you'll find in all the killings in the high schools by those young boys who murder and shoot all their fellow students and women and teachers are not often only the bullies who are doing this, but it's those who have been bullied, the quiet, silent ones who are so repressed and feel so put upon, and so much hidden anger and resentment, and never been able to stand up to the bullies outside themselves. These are the ones that go through what we call in psychology an antiodromia. They turn into their opposite. So this quiet, meek, perhaps even Christianized young person, all of a sudden, for apparently no reason, uh, has all these guns and just murders as many people as he possibly can. This is what happens when somebody tries to be good or is brought up in a family or a society or a culture that seemingly is loving, but in truth, there is no authenticity there. There's a lot of anger and um, lack of maturity among the parents and lack of interest in their children. And that's why some of these people turn out the way they do. And this is a growing collective issue as well as a personal issue. There's so many other factors and qualities of these kinds of personalities, and one needs to study this in psychology and understand and identify the uh, the picture of what some of these individuals would look like. I could ream off maybe 20 different characteristics. I've given you some already, but these people, they may be intelligent, but they have no emotional connection to anyone, and they need to join a brotherhood, but it's a fratricidal, patriarchal, patricidal kind of brotherhood where all they want to do is, in some ways, I'm speaking psychologically here, kill the father, which could mean who would be the enemy, and that's often between nations or religions. Kill the ones who are of a different color or sect or creed or religion or nationhood. So obviously, in the propaganda put out by the Jihadis, there's many things about um, killing all the Jews, bombing Israel until it's no more, killing the Americans and all the journalists or military from America or any Western country for that matter. We've seen examples of fatwas against Danish cartoonists and British journalists or writers, Salman Rushdie, and on and on and on. And this is an example of wanting to gain revenge or murder of the father image, if you like, or even the evil brother image from killing soldiers from a different background. Now, part of this whole thing that makes it so terrorizing and irrational is that now I will speak of the Islamic jihadis, although I want to be very clear that this is an international cross-cultural issue, and I've tried to pinpoint that it happens among the Christians, as in the Crusades, where they wanted to destroy Saladin and the Muslims at that time, or with Alexander the Great, who wanted to destroy the Persians, or in fact the Hindus. And we have so many different examples. You know, the Muslims wanted to kill the Zoroastrians and the Baha'is and the Christians, or the Hindus wanted to kill the Muslims in northern India. And I would say that one of the greatest bloodbaths and challenging battles between cultures and opposing groups is between the Hindus and the Muslims in India and Pakistan. Historically, we know that for a fact, and that story is not yet over either. So we have all these issues now, psychologically speaking, of the the danger of these unconscious individuals, young men, seeking identity in a very dark brotherhood who will stop at nothing. They want to destroy all. And I'm going to say it's a misguided interpretation of the Quran and the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, to suggest in a very narrow-minded uh, uh, way that all non-Muslims need to be killed. They should be sent to hell. The reading of the Quran, I think, is very narrow-minded and blinkered, and unfortunately militarized in a very popular way. And it's said that maybe 25 to 30% of Muslims in the entire Arab world are interested, young people interested in the jihadis, but they have a social prominence and a kind of a purveyance beyond their numbers in the population. Of course, it's all we ever hear about on the news today. Now, so in their reading of the Quran, they would say that there are only two kinds of people or societies in the world. Those are the societies that are already Muslim and those societies who will be made into Muslims. And this kind of thinking, where the future becomes the past, and the only future for the jihadis is to create one Islamic state for the whole world. And they will stop at nothing. There's this kind of momentum in the whole notion of this that we've seen before when we've had other Holocausts. And as Viktor Frankl has said, you know, the Holocaust we had in the Second World War, which he lived through and lost all his relatives in the concentration camps and the gas chambers. In 1993, he said, the Holocaust is happening in every nation right now. And there will be very likely a global Holocaust. And it's all ideological between those who are decent people, which are always in the minority, maybe 5 to 10% in the world and cultures, and those who are indecent people who have no moral compunction to kill and destroy and no guilt or shame or remorse and will stop at nothing to taunt and behead and murder and slice and dice as many people as they can. All the ethnic groups they want to create a complete genocide of all those who will not be converted to Islam. And if a group or a family or a nation or an ethnic group will not be converted, they will be murdered, as we've seen in the last 6 months, 6 years, 15 years in the Arab states, in the Middle East, and in North Africa. And in fact, the jihadis are worldwide. You know, they're bombing in Kenya, in India, many places, including hotels in Indonesia and Turkey, in America. This is 9/11 today, the 13th anniversary. In Britain in the subways, in Spain in the subways, and in Russia where they murdered 300 school children in a small village. All this is part of the worldwide jihadi movement. So it's ideological. It's the total destruction of anyone who will not play their game and be part of the system of destroying everyone who is wanting to be free-thinking and democratic. Part of the jihadi kind of social psyche or worldview or ethos is that they are completely resistant to democracy, to liberal ideas, to women's liberation, hence the treatment of women in some or most Arab countries, obviously gays and lesbians, in which they're actually now murdered, or there's a criminal capacity to execute them in many countries. And there's no interest in science or art or culture or liberal ideas or critical thinking or even music or architecture. Hence the destruction by Al Qaeda of all the great Buddhas in Afghanistan and so on and on and on and on. If we just piece together all the history, for centuries in fact, not just in the last 100 years, we will see that at least in the Muslim world, but I'd like to point out also in the Christian world, that these ideas have been prevalent and these ideologies have led to disastrous wars, murders, genocides, and conflicts that are only heating up and growing deeper and deeper and deeper. I likely will do another video just on the psychology of jihadis and young boys and how they get into this, who is susceptible, and how they can be brainwashed. But I'd like to end this one with a notion of preventativeness, and I'd like to say that the Western world, or the world at large, all people, including the Arab people, because obviously the Arab people themselves have been suffering. There is internal conflict in many Arab sects, again, the Shia Sunni conflict that's been going on in Iran and Iraq and Saudi and Iraq and on and on and on, different concatenations of inner conflict. This has been going on for a long time, and this needs to come to consciousness for all the people of the world, those who want to redevelop and regenerate the Arab Spring. And these are all issues of freedom, democracy, liberal ideas, coming to a higher consciousness, something with equality and justice, morality and ethics for all peoples, so that families and individuals of all backgrounds, Arab, Jew, Zoroastrian, Hindu, Muslim, Sikh, Baha'i, Christian, wherever you may be, we can all have the right to live the way we want and have the rights for freedom of speech, freedom of thought, freedom of spiritual traditions, and freedom to develop and educate ourselves and to become conscious of being one family and one species. The preventativeness then will deal with many issues, obviously. So from a psychological perspective, family issues, an educational perspective, we need videos and media focused on how to stop people from joining these movements. So positive videos, media, DVDs, video games to show not all the wars and destruction and killing, but how to become peaceful and co-create and play together instead of this like, you can't be in my sandbox, I'm just going to blow you out of the water. This is very puerile, it's very infantile. We have a long way to go, but we can get there. Education should turn itself around. The media and the movies and the TV shows need to show how we can work together and show young minds who are 2 years old age, 8 years, 18 years, that there is some way to find a deeper spiritual core identity and a psychological inner resilience, strength, courage, self-worth, self-esteem, and self-confidence. And for those who are coming back to our countries, now disloyal or despondent of the jihadist movement, when they realized they didn't want to just kill people, they thought this was just going to be a fun little lark and an adventure with some kind of a brotherhood. But when they got there, their conscience was pricked, and they realized that it was wrong to murder and behead and stab and kill and bomb and be a suicide bomber. It's not what they wanted to do. So we have to have some compassion and some rehabilitation strategies, psychological and social psychological, educational, and in fact linked with a political will to redeem not only those coming back to our nations, but all the young people who are disaffected. And I'd like to say that, in a society where there are few options for the millennials under the age of 30 or 35 to either be a financial advisor or go into the military, who will pay for their university and college education because they don't have a job, they can't find a job, or they're holding down 2 or 3 very small part-time jobs and can't afford to go to higher education or if they have, they got a debt that they'll never pay off. So the options are become a warrior in the military and kill like we have had to do for many generations. And by the way, I'd like to say that because we still, highly esteem war and all our relatives, our grandparents and parents and uncles who were in the wars, we feel, maybe young people feel a compunction to follow that family psychological pattern. I can say that having been in 18 generations of military, and my father and all my uncles and grandfathers on both sides. We have to come to understand that war is not the answer, and there's no pride or there's no kind of glory in killing and dying in a meaningless way when we could develop our human nature and create a true human civilization that is yet to exist on the planet. So I'm calling out to all the teachers and the mothers and the fathers and university and college professors to create programs other than just, financial, economic people giving MBAs, to create some more liberal arts and humanities programs where we actually study this and understand it from a psychological, anthropological, social science, philosophical, metaphysical, cosmological, and historical perspective, and cross-cultural without blame or judgment, but yet taking seriously the fact that the movement at this point is among the Muslim Islamicists, the Jihadis, and that doesn't include all the Muslims, and yet has become worldwide as they all are seemingly, or many of them are interested in joining this movement. This threat perhaps can be averted. It's a major threat. The reason for doing this on 9/11 is to suggest to us all that we need to understand this personally, do our own shadow work, speak about all this and educate ourselves, listen to the news and try to understand, as I said in the beginning. This is about understanding, knowledge, and wisdom to know more about human nature and how we tick. Take it for real. Don't deny it anymore. Stop repressing all our inner urges. Know that they are there, and if we don't look at them, that they will bite us in the behind, as it were. But I'm saying this in a very drastically, terrifyingly dangerous way, that the war of all against all, which has been predicted by many people over the last 5 centuries, could still seriously happen on planet Earth. But the Third World War, if and when it happens, it starts only in one place. It starts in every person's mind. The Third World War, or the upcoming peace, will start in your mind. It's how you think about it. Are you divisive and rejecting and projecting and judging other people and calling them evil or wrong or bad or from a different religion, as many in the Christian religious right do, unfortunately, very unconsciously? Or are you coming together with an open-heartedness and emotional connection to see that these are just young boys on another side of the world with different means, and we need to have some compassion for these people who have gone so far that all they want to do is kill and destroy and murder, and they will stop at nothing. This is a force within ourselves individually and the collective. So lots of work to do in terms of social science, history, cosmology, psychology in particular, and just becoming aware and stop denying that this is happening and become conscious of the need to do something for ourselves and for our world and for our children, our grandchildren, and for 7 or 77 generations to come. God willing, God is willing, there still will be a planet. And in closing, I'd like to say it has to do with we don't know who we are as individuals, and we don't know who we are as a species. We have a complete lack of spiritual, psychological identity. Many of the books and the workshops that I've done over the decades for 40 years focus on finding out who you are, why you're here, what your skills and abilities are, and using them for the good for all our relations, all peoples, and the planet, and the animals. This is the key. I'm hoping this has been an inspiration to you, that it's a basic call to consciousness, as we say in our way, that one you will take very sincerely and discuss it with all your friends and your family, and make sure that you can open your heart and have more connectivity to other people. Move out of your loneliness and depression. Speak up about what you're thinking and feeling. Avoid the path of self-destruction and self-denial, which is what the jihadi path really is. Instead, move towards a path of humanity, love, coalition, connection, communication, listening to the other side, understanding, and having a lot of compassion. Well, that's it for now. Stay tuned for other videos on this very important topic, but I'd like to suggest that we can change the world, and you personally can be the change you want to see in the world. And it starts with an open heart, an open mind, and purity of mind and heart. All good wishes, Om Namah Shivaya, to all of you. My love and blessings to you, Dr. Joseph Martin.